Hello everyone, I'm Mari Katayanagi, Professor and Director of International Peace and Coexistence Program, Graduate School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Hiroshima University. In this lecture, we'll be discussing human rights-based peacebuilding. This lecture consists of three components. First, what are human rights? Second, human rights violations and conflict. And the third, the main component, is the human rights-based peacebuilding. We are starting with this question, what are human rights? The content of this part is very basic, but just in case you are not familiar with this concept, we'd better know it first. Here I quoted Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination. These rights are all interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. So, as far as we are human beings, we are all entitled to human rights. Where the international community has started, it was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted in 1948. Out of this document, declaration, we came up with two documents. The first one is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the other one is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Out of a single declaration, why do we have two covenants? This reflects the political context of the time. These were adopted in 1966, meaning that we had the East-West rivalry in the world. So the Eastern countries under socialism or communism, these countries thought that we have to prioritize economic, social, and cultural rights, while the Western countries thought that we first have to prioritize civil and political rights. So these different ways of thinking led to the two covenants. So from these two covenants, starting from two covenants, we have developed different human rights treaties. We had several themes in each treaty. We have different themes in each treaty. So the first one, racial discrimination, discrimination against women, torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, rights of the child, rights of migrant workers, and rights of persons with disabilities. So these are some examples. Here, this figure shows the structure how to protect human rights. Who are the right holders? The right holders are the citizens. And who is the duty bearer? It's usually the government. So we right holders are able to claim our human rights, while the government has accountability towards right holders. And if this scheme works well, then we can be happy about our human rights situation. So what is actually the duty of the government? It is to respect, protect, and fulfill the fundamental human rights. This does not only mean that the government has to protect and realize human rights on its own, but also the government has to prevent human rights violations by other actors. For example, in today's world, we discuss the human rights responsibilities of corporations, so human rights responsibilities of enterprises. When there are problems caused by enterprises, the government's duty is to prevent the violations of human rights committed by these actors. Now we move on to human rights violations and conflict. So human rights violations can be the causes of armed conflicts or the consequences of the armed conflicts. So we can ask questions, what are the typical human rights violations before armed conflicts? Or what are the typical human rights violations caused by armed conflicts? So here we have examples of violations as causes of armed conflicts. The typical example can be freedom of expression. Nowadays, we have problems of authoritarian regimes, increasing number of authoritarian regimes. And under the authoritarian regimes, frequently we see the restrictions of freedom of expression. We are not able to say what we think about any political issues, or we have problem to have meetings with a high number of people, or even to go to the street for demonstration can be problematic. We may risk our security. Another serious problem is the enforced disappearances. Under the authoritarian regimes, sometimes we experience that people disappear and we don't know whereabouts of those people. These people may be killed, or these people may be tortured, and they may come back, they may be released, but with severe consequences after the torture. Also, as causes of conflict, we can think about the poverty, extreme poverty situation. So under the extreme poverty, we may have problem with right to food, right to work, or right to education. And when these fundamental human rights are violated or are not fulfilled, then some people may think that there is only way out by taking arms and to fight. Here are the examples of human rights violations as consequences of armed conflict. First of all, we have the problem of right to life. In the conflict situation, our life can be threatened on a daily basis. We also have problem with freedom from torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, because again, during the conflict, people may be captured, imprisoned, and then face torture. And those who are captured may face the situation that they have to go for the trial, but without the right to fair trial. No lawyers may be provided. Also, in the conflict situation, our basic human needs may not be met. The examples are the right to water or right to shelter. If you are displaced in the conflict situation, you may have problems with these basic needs. Here we have the third component, human rights-based peacebuilding. I think many of you are familiar with human rights-based approach to development. So in case of human rights-based approach to development, we usually call it HLBA. We look at, for example, poverty with the human rights lens. If we look at poverty with human rights lens, this poverty, the situation of poverty, can be considered from the perspectives of different rights. For example, right to work, right to housing, right to food, right to health, right to education, and right to political participation. Why right to political participation? If you don't have the conditions where these basic rights are not met, and also if you are not able to receive education, it may be difficult to understand the political issues which are at stake, or you may not have the access to the information, political information. So that deprives you of right to political participation. On the HLBA, we have a document entitled The UN Statement of Common Understanding on Human Rights-Based Approaches to Development Cooperation and Programming. Under this document, it is said that all programs of development cooperation and cooperation policies and technical assistance need to further realization of human rights. And all development cooperation and programming should follow the guidance of the human rights instruments. Development cooperation contributes to the development of the capacities of duty bearers to meet the obligations and/or of rights holders to claim their rights. The third point means that both duty bearers and right holders' capacities need to be increased. Now, following this human rights-based approach to development, we can think of human rights-based approach to peace building. So it's that same mechanism that we look at conflict with human rights lens. And if we do so, we have the same situation, we can talk about the same rights in relation to the conflict. Right to work may be deprived during the conflict. Right to housing, if you are displaced, your right to housing is deprived. Right to food, right to health, right to education, these can be harmed too. And right to political participation, this may face severe obstacles because the other party in the conflict may try to attack you if you are participating in politics. Let's look at a particular case. So the situation is that we have no access to water. In this situation, we can ask some questions. Who is disadvantaged? Is it that everybody are deprived of the access to water? Or is it that a particular group of people are deprived of this access to water? What are the reasons for this? Is it political, legislative, or social reasons? So if it's a political, legislative reason, it means if we fix this legislation, we may be able to provide access to water for more people. But if it's something else, political or social reasons, we have to address the other points of the society. Has the voice of the disadvantaged ever been heard? That's another question. So those people who have no access to water, can they claim their right to water? Or is it the situation that the government, either national or local, does not want to hear these people's voices? In that case, these people are really marginalized in the society. So, there is someone controlling the water resources, and this is directly connected to existing power structures. The water resources are in the hand of particular people, particular group of people maybe, and then these existing power structures prevent some groups of people from accessing, so prevent some group of people from accessing to water. This figure shows different activities of peace building. So in peace building, we have peculiar activities such as security sector reform, or DDR, which stands for disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. So security sector reform means reforming military, police, or intelligence, or other relevant agencies into a democratic institutions, democratic agencies. Well, DDR, this is about ex-combatants. In transforming from conflict situation to peace situation, we have to reduce the number of people who hold arms. So we have to get rid of arms and then release these people from armed groups, and then reintegrate them into the community. And here, rule of law is also relevant to these activities. And I have put human rights here, while human rights are relevant to all other activities. And I will discuss this human rights in detail later. Another activities we do in peace building is the assisting return of refugees and internally displaced persons. We also engage in democratization, such as conduct of elections or improving governance. Reconstruction of infrastructure, for example, is essential as well, and transitional justice. This is to question the human rights violations in the past, particularly during the conflict, and then try to end this situation of impunity. We try to find out what has happened in relation to human rights violations, and then, if needed, to punish the perpetrators. Now let's focus on human rights work in peace building. We of course need to monitor the human rights situation. Then we investigate human rights violations and report these findings. Human rights education is also very important, and in relation to that, advocacy work. We also establish institutions related to human rights, for example, national human rights institutions, and then we do capacity building for different agencies. Transitional justice is what I have just mentioned. So we are back to this structure of human rights realization. Government as duty bearer and citizens as right holders. Right holders can claim our human rights, and government has the accountability towards citizens. And the duty of the government is to respect, protect, and fulfill the fundamental human rights. And here I would like to add national human rights institutions as I mentioned, as the institution building in relation to human rights and civil society. So human rights institutions, national human rights institutions and civil society can be an actor, important actors to participate in this realization of human rights. I'd like to mention just a little bit about Sustainable Development Goals. As we all know, Goal 16 is the goal on peace, and it reads, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So, to realize these peaceful and inclusive societies, we need institution building, capacity building, and education of people. Access to justice is particularly related to institution building, and effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions are also related to institution building and capacity building. Of course, in capacity building, education is relevant. So, in order to realize human rights for our sustainable peace, we need to know our own human rights, and not only thinking about our own human rights, to think about other people's human rights. So we need to respect others' human rights. In doing so, we will achieve coexistence. I hope we will be able to apply human rights-based approach to peace building so that we will build a peaceful society together. Thank you very much for attending this course, and I close this session with a photo of Hiroshima University. Thank you.